At the edge of the Nevada desert, a locked-down military landscape became the center of one of the strangest modern mystery stories. In the dark, a small craft was said to move without visible wings, without sound, and without any familiar engine. The name most closely tied to that story is Bob Lazar, who claimed he worked inside a secret area near Groom Lake in the late 1980s. His account turned a closed test site into a global question. What exactly was being hidden there? For supporters, the appeal was never just the secrecy. It was the precision of the claim, the kind that sounds too specific to invent easily. Recovered craft, unfamiliar materials, and a propulsion system unlike anything in public aviation. Lazar said the craft seemed to use gravity itself as part of the engine, bending the usual rules of flight. If that account was even partly true, it would place the mystery not in the sky, but in a hidden laboratory beneath the desert. To understand why the story spread so fast, it helps to remember the setting. Area 51 sat inside a larger culture of classified aviation, where experimental aircraft, secrecy, and rumor naturally blurred together. That secrecy gave the tale room to breathe. In the late Cold War atmosphere, anything unusual near the base could be read as either advanced technology or something far stranger. Lazar's background added another layer of intrigue. He presented himself as a technician with access to classified work, and he described a place called S4, tucked away from the main base and heavily restricted. According to his account, the work there involved examining a craft of non-human origin. The story moved beyond ordinary black project rumors and into territory that, for many, sounded almost impossible to say out loud. The first details people remembered were the ones that felt concrete. He described a compact craft, a smooth exterior, and no visible control surfaces, as if flight happened by a principle not yet public. Then came the element that made the story linger. The idea of a reactor using a material he called Element 115. At the time, that sounded like a technical clue from the edge of science fiction. He said the material was central to the propulsion system, feeding a gravitational effect that could lift and maneuver the craft. That single claim gave the entire case a strange, almost engineering-like structure. What kept the tale alive was not only the technology, but the way it was told. Lazar spoke as if he were describing a machine, not a myth, and that tone made listeners lean in. Supporters also point to the consistency of the story over time. Across interviews and retellings, the core picture remained similar. Hidden hangars, unusual craft, and a government program few people were meant to hear about. One of the most compelling details was the reported flight behavior. He described the craft tilting, then accelerating in a way that seemed to ignore the normal relationship between thrust, drag, and inertia. That kind of motion is difficult to forget because it is easy to picture. A machine that can stop, pivot, and vanish into the dark would challenge not just pilots, but the entire logic of conventional flight. Another detail that drew attention was the location itself. Area 51 had long been associated with secret aircraft testing, which meant the story landed in a place already primed for extraordinary speculation. That overlap matters. A hidden base can shelter both advanced human engineering and stories that grow larger than the facts available to the public. As the claims spread, investigators and journalists tried to trace Lazar's education and employment history. Some records seemed to support parts of his background, while other pieces became difficult to verify cleanly. That uncertainty became part of the mystery. For believers, the missing paper trail suggested deliberate erasure. For skeptics, it raised questions about how much of the story could be independently confirmed. The most famous supporting detail came from a public demonstration of sorts, when the story entered wider culture and people began treating the desert base as a symbol of hidden knowledge. The case was no longer local rumor. It had become a modern legend. Yet the legend persisted because it still sounded technical enough to invite scrutiny. The propulsion description, the unusual material, and the secluded worksite formed a chain of claims that felt oddly connected. Skeptics question whether the story was built from fragments of real secrecy, personal embellishment, and public fascination with the unknown. In a place famous for classified aircraft, even a small exaggeration can grow quickly. They also point to the difficulty of verifying his academic and professional claims in the way a strict historical record would require. That does not erase the story, but it does complicate how confidently it can be read. Still, the strongest supporters argue that the case should be judged by the specificity of the description. The craft layout, the remote facility, and the propulsion idea all fit together with unusual internal logic. That logic is what keeps people returning to the story decades later. If the account was invented, it was invented with a level of detail that continues to resist easy dismissal. At the same time, the conventional reading remains plausible. A talented storyteller may have mixed real knowledge of secret aviation with claims that outpaced what could be shown. In a world of classified projects, the line between fact and projection can be thin. What makes the case hard to close is that both readings leave something behind. The skeptical version explains the secrecy, but not the enduring precision of the narrative. The believer's version explains the precision, but depends on trust that remains incomplete. And then there is the material claim itself, which remains the most tantalizing part of the whole account. A substance said to power gravity-based flight would change history if it were ever demonstrated publicly. That is why the story never really settled into the past. It sits at the edge of aviation, intelligence history, and modern folklore, where each new retelling revives the same old question. If the claims were partly true, then the silence around them would make sense in a very different way. If they were not, then the case still reveals how powerfully secrecy can shape public imagination. Either way, the mystery remains unusually durable because it rests on a simple human tension: the desire to know what is hidden, and the suspicion that some things are hidden for reasons we may never fully see. That tension is the real center of the Bob Lazar story: a sealed place in the desert, a claim of impossible technology, and a trail of questions that still do not line up neatly.